Are we up and running?
Yes, ma'am.
We're up and running. Okay, great. I I don't like that I can't see everybody. So
Can we get camera on? I'm not sure.
well, that's okay. I know that there's people here, so perfect. This is Dion. I don't know if y'all can see me. Oh, here, my camera's not even on. Hello, hello. I didn't rehearse, so let's get going. So I want to introduce, I'm glad everybody's able to join us. This is our newly added module to the Certified Mortgage Leader program. We have Elizabeth Miller with us here today, and she is the National Training Manager for DHI Mortgage, and she's involved with lots of things with the TMBA board, different committees, and we learned that she has such a passion for education. So she has volunteered. We're going to have her today, and we're going to have her again in another module. So I know you've got a jam-packed agenda today, so I am turning it over to Elizabeth. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dion. Welcome, everybody. And I'm not sure if you can turn your camera on. If we are able to get those settings on, that would be great. But you should be able to unmute yourself. I'm not sure. Let's see if I can.
They should be able to.
Okay. If you want to just test that to make sure you can unmute yourself, I encourage you to chime in and join in verbally if you just want to unmute yourself. It looks like in the chat window they're saying they cannot. Let me check on if we can maybe give you that from here. I can do that. Allow mic. I might have to do that for each person. Let me get you going so that you guys can share. You know what? We have a fairly small group, so if you guys don't mind, just for the sake of your experience, I'm going to take a moment to give you mic access and go back, and I think I can give you camera access as well.
Elizabeth, if you'd like to go ahead and get started, I can do that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure thing.
I would definitely think that will help our experience. Our topic today is conflict management. So as someone in the industry related to TMBA, we can probably all say that conflict is something we're going to experience. Conflict is inevitable wherever people are working together with other people. Conflict can arise. So you should have received via email a handout. So I do want to make sure that you all have a handout that looks like this. We don't need it right this second, but if you don't have this out and available, you might want to check your emails to make sure that you received it. It's an attachment, and it is a couple pages, 3 pages, I believe. And we will be referring to this handout during the session. So get your hands on that. And I can also throw it in the chat window we could if someone cannot find it. So let us know if you have issues with that handout. Okay, let's jump into our topic of conflict management. Our objectives today. This is all on you. I want you to be in that active learning mode so that you can achieve hopefully some of these things. After completing this training, this investment of just an hour together, you should be able to understand the value of conflict instead of fearing it, and instead of trying to avoid it or pretend that it doesn't exist, actually see the value in conflict and what you can get from it. Recognize the sources of conflict, where it comes from, so you can anticipate it. Identify your personal conflict response style and possibly learn other ways to address conflict that might be out of your comfort zone, but areas where you want to practice. And then we're going to give you a model of conflict resolution that was actually developed at Texas State University. So Yay for Texas schools being focused on topics that impact us in the corporate and real world. It doesn't live in academia, but I actually taught this class at Texas University back in 2016. So it's also won awards for this particular model of getting through conflict, and I've seen it work on my own team as well. So these are our objectives for the next hour. Thank you all for turning your cameras on. It's great to see your faces. And again, I'm going to encourage you, if you want to interrupt me with a question, comment, an insight that you have, story to share, please do. Just come right off mute. I will also be keeping a peek at the chat window if you want to communicate that way as well. And I noticed that someone shared the handout in the chat as well, if you want to grab that quickly. Okay, moving on from our objectives. The value of conflict. I don't typically like to read to you, but we are going to review this definition. So the fact that we're different, the fact that we're diverse, means that we can experience conflict with other people. So differences can lead to conflict, but not all differences. You know, just because we have different color eyes doesn't mean we're going to have conflict. So what types of differences lead to conflict? And I think the definition of conflict helps give us some insights here. So conflict is a condition of disharmony and disagreement that exists when people, and here's the variables here. Here's what we're looking at, the underlined pieces. It's when people who depend on one another see their needs, beliefs and values, or goals as incompatible. So, you know, if you just hop on an elevator with someone, they're a stranger, and your only interaction is your time on the elevator, and then you get off on different floors, you're not likely to have conflict with that person. And unfortunately, when you're in working environments, you are closer to people than just a stranger on an elevator. So the requirement for conflict to happen is that you need to depend on one another for something. You have to, I expect something from you, you expect something from me, and because we're depending on one another, that's when conflict can arise. So conflict happens when you work with someone, when you, your personal partner in life, you know, someone who's closest to you, you're going to have conflict with. It could be siblings, it could be your own children, it could be your parents, it could be friends and associates. But whenever there's some sort of link between you and another person, that's when conflict is likely to arise. And it arises when you discover or you become aware of something being incompatible. Your needs aren't the same as my needs. Your beliefs and values are different from my beliefs and values, or your goals and my goals are incompatible in some way. That's really where they come into play. So the value in that is understanding how we differ and understanding where we initially feel like we might not be compatible. Being aware of that is actually a good thing. Taking note of that, but then working through it in a productive and healthy way actually can bring people together more strongly. If you can find a way through differences to be more united and more compatible with each other, find where that common ground is, that's when conflict can be really productive. And if you did never have that conflict, you might not have gotten there. So sometimes the type of bonds and unity that you can achieve with someone else can only be achieved through conflict. You hear about service members in the military when they go through a conflict or they go through strife, challenges, battle with each other, they come out on the other side more bonded and stronger. And the same happens with us as individuals. When we go through conflict with someone and we do it in the right way, we can work with them better. This can even stem to clients. You have a challenging client that you're working with. If you can address those differences in a healthy way, you can have a client for life after that point because you did so in the right way. So another point on the value of conflict is some of the results of conflict. So I'm just going to touch on these briefly. Conflict can result in growth in a lot of ways. When you have conflict with someone, coworker, boss, even a customer, if there's some sort of initial conflict that you work through, it helps you establish boundaries and norms for that relationship. And hey, I'm not going to cross that line. I know it's a sensitive topic for you. It creates that respect of each other's boundaries and norms as well. You also have a space if you're open to conflict, if you're open to actually meeting conflict where it is, it allows each party in the conflict to express their feelings. And I was actually raised in leadership back in the 80s and 90s where there was no room for emotions in the workplace. You don't show emotion at work. You put on your shoulder pads and you don't show emotion. But we found that a healthier way for organizations to create stronger teams is to allow for feeling. And so conflict sometimes is where that space begins when people have high levels of feelings. You also get to identify individual needs. For those of you who are leaders or hope to be leaders in the future, you oftentimes approach things as a leader by looking at the whole organization, or you're looking at the entire region, or you're looking at an entire team, and you're making decisions off of team needs or organizational needs. But when conflict occurs between people, it gives you an opportunity to realize exactly where the needs differ between individuals. And you might say, you know what, I made this decision for the group, but we need to maybe put in some exceptions for that. Maybe there are some policies and procedures we can build in for the needs of individuals. So it's kind of enlightening when you experience that through conflict. It also helps balance power. Teams are stronger and more productive when there's not a huge differential between power. Now, you still often, especially in our culture, American culture, you have a leader, you have a president of an organization, you have a department head, you have a vice president of a business unit. There is definitely power structure. But when you're on a project, or when you're trying to get a loan from point A to point Z, or you're trying to, you're part of a department that has a particular vision for that group, you need to have a sense of we're all in this together, and going through conflict together and doing it, as I keep repeating, in a healthy way, reduces that power differential so that it's not like, oh, well, you're up here in your ivory tower making decisions for us, and you don't know what goes on the ground, when the rubber hits the road. So it helps bring leaders, you feel like your leaders are with you. And then it also helps leaders have a greater understanding of those who report to them. It balances that power a little bit. And one of the last benefits of conflict is, and I inferred it a little bit with the kind of the military analogy, but you build a history of survival. You got through differences together, and now you're more bonded at the end of it. So with just a couple slides, tell me, feel free to come off mute or type in the chat window. Do you want conflict on your teams, or do you not want conflict? Yes or no to conflict? What are your thoughts? Kimberly says, yes, conflict can be good. You're just telling me what I want to hear. What do you think? What's your first reaction when someone brings conflict to your attention?
I think, can you guys hear me?
I think I hear someone chatting, but your volume is very, very low.
Can you hear me now? Is it still low?
Is that you, Shay? I think you might be very quiet or
Oh,
cutting out.
I can't, I don't know how to.
You might want to type in the chat window.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll do that.
or it might just be background noise. It's hard to tell. Kimberly
I think-
shares, initial reaction is to not want conflict because it takes effort. But Lacey also shares, yes, conflict can strengthen your team. Someone else was about to share.
I was gonna say the same thing that Kim just said, that if there's conflict, my initial reaction is, oh no, you kind of tense up a little bit. But I found just in leading teams, because I've had them before, that's actually where we do some of our best work. And we all learn something in the end. So it's actually results in something positive. It's just difficult to go through at the time.
Yeah, it's not easy. Hopefully with today's training, I'm going to give you some tools so that the next time conflict arises, you can say, you know what? Good that you brought this up, because the fact that you have differing opinions on this is knowledge we didn't have before, right? That's a good thing. So let's hunker down and let's get through this in an efficient, we're not going to waste time, but we're going to get through it, and we have steps to do that. Yeah, conflict is good if you can work effectively with conflict. Nancy shared there, and I'm gonna maybe change one word there, work effectively through conflict. You don't want to just live with conflict where it's just staying there. You want to resolve it and move through it and get out to the other side. And I compare conflict to broken glass. If conflict arises, it's like someone broke a glass and now there's shattered glass shards all over your floor. If you're just like, okay, everyone calm down, we're just not going to address this. Let's just keep moving forward. We got to get through the day. We'll deal with this later. Everyone's now walking on broken glass. It's there. It's affecting everything we do. It is impacting our relationships with each other. It impacts how much we're going to go the extra mile for someone else, how much trust we have in each other. All of those things are at a detriment if the broken glass remains on the floor. You know, imagine we're all barefoot, we're all walking around, the broken glass is there. So getting through conflict in the right way, these steps are like sweeping up that glass and getting it out of the way. And so we can't just try and avoid it. So embrace it. It's there, face it, and we're going to go through it. So where can we see, oh, I don't want to miss chat window. Shay shared, I think most of us do not want conflict, but it's inevitable. Yeah, great point. We don't want it, but beware the team that claims to have zero conflict. And beware a leader who says they have a zero tolerance for conflict. I want everyone to get along. Because what that means is that conflict's still going to be there, but we're just not going to talk about it. And we're going to keep it suppressed and down below, or we're going to have this little group click over here that talks about it to try it, because it's zero tolerance, so we can't openly discuss it. But that is even more toxic than straight up in your face conflict. I'd rather have someone have conflict out in the open than to have that toxic underlying conflict. So be careful if you're trying to suppress conflict too much. So just assume it's inevitable and let it be. Let it come at you, face it. But I'm going to arm you so that you're not facing it without some tools. So where are we going to see conflict? Sources of conflict. Conflict comes from tension. And oftentimes when you first feel tension, it's not at the stage quite yet of being conflict, but you feel it fairly early on. And it's when those competing needs or those incompatibilities we discussed before start starting to just be aware of that tension, and we kind of feel it, but it's culminating and it's brewing and it's slowly getting up to the point where it can be conflict. But if you can address the source of conflict before it goes into, dislike for each other, right? You can catch it before it gets bad. And I'm not going to go into detail on these. However, if you want to know more about this, feel free to reach out to me. There's a lot of research on where tension comes between people. But some key ones are, these aren't about good people and bad people. This is not about productive people and lazy people. It's not about, oh, this person, they're stubborn and they won't work with the team. That's not often where tension comes from. It's actually just differences in our personalities and our cultures and how we see the world. And so you wouldn't want to get into a shouting match with someone simply because your personalities are different, right? But sometimes we let that happen because we don't address the tension. So someone who struggles with differences in these areas. So someone who likes autonomy. I like to work alone. I'm an independent introvert. I like to get my work done versus the need for connection. And hey, we want this team to be engaged and work with each other. See, like someone who is high on the autonomy scale might conflict with someone who's high on the connection scale. But neither's right or wrong. We just differ in that way. So that's just one example of where tension can happen. You also have someone who's high on the stability scale. They like stable and consistent, and this is how we do things. And then you've got someone else who thrives on change and spontaneity. And, I'm kind of bored with it. Is there a better way to do this, right? Those two people who are high on those spectrums can conflict. Someone who's high on expression versus someone who's high on privacy. I like to express everything that's going on in my life, what happened to me this morning, what I did this weekend. Hey, everyone, tell me what you did this weekend, what's going on, versus someone who's high on the privacy scale, who's like, I don't feel comfortable sharing that kind of stuff in every team meeting, right? You can see where conflict can happen there. And then there's a whole bunch of communication contexts, such as your communication style or your communication preferences and expectations and how often and what is urgent to you versus what is urgent to me. We could spend hours and hours and hours slicing and dicing how we differently come across in our communication and how that can lead to conflict. So just know that sources of conflict aren't about one teammate being right or one teammate being wrong in that argument. It is often that they're both right. They're just seeing the world differently. Okay, one more slide on sources of conflict. And I will tell you, I know this has all been very lecture-y. This is the end. This is the last slide of lecture. We're going to go do some activities after this. So we talked about differences in beliefs, values, and goals. And additional sources of conflict here. Differences in beliefs and values are really about, what is worth fighting for. So the more long-standing and difficult conflicts occur when people have different values about what constitutes conflict and how conflict should be managed. So even when we're in tension with someone, you've got someone who thinks, you know what, let's just move on. Let's agree to disagree. And then you've got someone who's like, no, I want to find some consensus. I'm more comfortable if we get to some agreement. So we can even disagree on how we address conflict, right? But we have varied backgrounds, varied expectations. We have high and low context communication. We can also have incompatible goals. So we are going to, I believe, share some of this deck with you. So if you want to look at it, you'll see I've got like lots of notes right underneath this slide. So if you want more information on sources of conflict, I've got that information for you. So before we move on to our activity, what thoughts do you have on the two things we covered, the value of conflict and your sources of conflict? Questions, feedback, thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
I have a question. I mean,
Sure.
on this slide, you mentioned the high and the low context communication.
Mhm.
Can you clarify more on that?
Sure. Yeah, so when communication is high context, and I'm referring to my notes here, if you see me look down, um, people, and this is very cultural, it can be cultural differences too. A high context communication individual, their background is that they have high context. They expect others to kind of translate the implicit meanings based on the situation, on the relationship between communication. So you have to, I would hope you would have noticed my nonverbals. I'm very high context. You should have recognized my body language that I wanted you to follow me. You know, there's etiquette involved. Hey, if I do this, you should do that. So if you come from a high context communication culture, there's a lot of rules about communication and how people behave with each other. It's not all spoken, it's implied. Um, it reminds me of like how you should behave around royalty, right? When you are going to meet the Queen of England, there's a lot of high context communication going on. No one's going to tell you verbally that you should bow, but you should, right? But if you're with a low context communication, if that's your preference, if that's part of your culture, we expect information to be given directly and explicitly. Clarify on that. I need to see it in words. I need to see it in writing before I truly understand it. American culture is a little bit more low context. We need it said, or else we don't quite get it. And I would say in the corporate world, we probably lean more towards low context communication. You know, hey, I didn't know you expected that of me. You didn't tell me. It's like, oh, well, I didn't need to tell you. You should have some critical thinking skills. You should have known that was expected, but you didn't tell me. Do you see how easily that can lead to conflict? So that's one example of high versus low context communication leading to conflict. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And that's the sort of level of detail that are more in the notes as well, if you want to do a deep dive into any of these. But again, any other questions, we can go back and touch on any of the topics we've covered so far. Any other thoughts? Any aha moments, things you've learned so far? I'm patient. I'm gonna let you ponder that and think a little bit, but I want to hear from someone, something you learned, a question, feedback, how you might apply this to your work role.
I think the high versus low. I think that is kind of I'd probably say looking at that seems like it's a very prevalent conflict, because there are, you have people who are presumptive and, okay, well, I expected you, to do that. You should have, and especially, whenever we get busy and life gets crazy, and especially in this industry, there comes times where we're running around like a chicken with our head cut off and we say, hey, this needs to get done. And you come back 2 hours later after you've done all of this, and you're like, hey, did you get that done? And they're like, I didn't know that you wanted me. And, I think that happens in so many industries, and it's because you're just so, okay, wait, I if somebody told me, if my boss told me that, I would be like, okay, yep, I'm going to get that done. But there are people, and I think that that's seeing the other side of the coin, right? Making sure that you understand that not everybody has that presumptive mindset. Like, oh, okay, let me do that. So I think that
And-
that's a good point.
That's a great point, Lacey, that you brought up that, it's more prevalent and we do see
Sure.
that a lot. And I think like, well, wouldn't anyone have thought to do this or that? They might have actually thought to do it, but because you didn't ask them to do it or tell them to do it, they chose to leave that piece off or not do that part. So yeah, we do see that a lot.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that that's in every industry. I think that's just in daily life, and, me sitting here thinking about it as I'm talking through that, it's like with my son, I'm like, hey, the dishes need to get done. And I come in and I'm like, you've been sitting here playing video games for 2.5 hours. Why aren't the dishes done? And so that's, he's not at that stage of, oh, I guess maybe that's an implication that I should do that.
Or even, hey, the dishes need to get done. Is that actually asking
It's not a question.
someone
Yeah.
to do it or telling
Yep.
someone to do it? That's just, okay, yeah,
Yep.
we all agree with you. Check.
Yeah.
We all agree, and they sit there. Yeah. And some people would have heard that, me as a daughter, if my mom even said a little, I wonder if we should get some laundry started. I'm like running to start the laundry.
Yes.
I was raised on very high context. In fact, she probably didn't even have to see it. I just need to see her glance at the washer and raise her eyebrow. And I'm like, oh, I better start some laundry.
Yeah.
Right? She didn't even have to say it. So how you're raised, it doesn't even have to be necessarily ethnically cultural. It's how you were
Sure.
raised and maybe the school you went to, your friend group, all of those lead to what your expectations are. Great
Sure.
share. Thank you, Lacey. Okay, guys, I want you to get to your handout. So let me actually flip this. Technically, you could do this without even printing it. You can just jot it down on scratch paper. So if you didn't have a chance to print it, still participate. What you're going to do is it's super quick, super easy. See how short that is? You're going to identify your conflict response style. Now, I do want you to think about the context of conflict because how you deal with conflict at work may not be the same way that you deal with conflict at home or with a spouse or while you're driving, let's say. So think of a particular context and then complete this questionnaire in that context. So if you want to look at what your conflict response style is at work, read each of these statements. There are 15 statements, and you're going to circle 1, 2, 3, or 4 for each statement. How, if you do that rarely, sometimes, often, or always. And this is a self-assessment. And the more realistically and honestly you complete this, the more accurate your results are at the bottom. So let's do one together. The first one is, I discuss issues with others to try and find solutions that meet everyone's needs. Do I do that rarely, sometimes, often, or always? I don't want you to answer it in, well, that's what I should be doing. So I'm going to put that I always do that. Actually, what you really do. So for me, I would say sometimes I do that. I don't always do that because I'm not a consensus type person. I'm more of a there's a right way or there's a wrong way. And you better agree with the right way. Kind of, like I'm self-aware enough to know that about myself that I would probably put that I do that sometimes. That doesn't mean that's right or wrong. It's just how I respond to conflict. It's going to show what my comfort zone is. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. And if you will, go ahead and give me a thumbs up when you're done with all 15 of your statements. And I'll put this on the screen in case you just want to do it off of my shared screen. Feel free to do that as well. Jot down your numbers. Now the colors matter. So if you're going to do it on a scratch piece of paper, put numbers 1 through 15 and then put your numbers. It will help. And you should have a react button with a little thumbs up in there if you want to do that when you're done. Does anyone need more time? I only saw a few thumbs up. Okay, now we've got, feel free to keep working if you're working on your statements, but for those of you that are done, you're now going to score down below, and you're basically adding up the colors. So all of the yellow lines, so question 6, 10, or statement 6, 10, and 15, you're going to add those 3 numbers up and write that number in the yellow box. And so forth. And you're going to end up with 5 numbers. And that's going to help you determine what your conflict response styles are. Does anyone, I'm going to go ahead and put this back up. Is anyone still adding their colors together? You should have a yellow style, a orangey peach style, purple, and blue. And I know we sent this handout out this morning, so some of you might have it already done. So thank you for your patience. Okay, you should have a yellow number, peach number, purple, oh, green, I didn't mention earlier, and blue. Anyone still need more time on their adding? Okay, I'm going to give you a few more minutes. I'll scroll this back up in case you needed the questions again. Okay. How are we doing? Raise your hand if you still need just a little bit more time. Anyone? Okay, we're going to move on. So you should have 5 totals here at the bottom of your little worksheet, and they correspond to a style. Does anyone have one particular style that is predominant, the highest number? Does anyone have a single one? Some of you do. Okay, some of you might have that one highest score that is your preferred response style. However, you could have 2 or even 3 that are close together, and you might have multiple response styles. You don't have to have just one. But whichever is your lowest score is your least preferred response conflict style. So these are ways that you can approach conflict, but this is important. If you don't take anything away from this, I want you to remember this sentence here. Each style has pros and cons. It's important to use the most appropriate style for a particular conflict situation. There is no right style or wrong style. There is no, this one's always better than that one. They're not on a lowest to highest grading. There are some situations that call for each and every one of these styles. And really, the best approach is to get good at any of these styles and recognizing that each situation might call on you to adapt and be a little different than what your norm is in order to respond appropriately. So I'm going to close our worksheet and we're going to, okay, you did your assessment activity. Everyone's good. Does anyone have questions on your assessment activity, knowing what your response style is? Okay, now if I call out things about your style, like, hey, raise your hand if you're a shark, or raise your hand if, there's a different styles. You can share if you'd like to, but you don't have to. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable sharing, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure I pointed that out. Okay, your conflict response style. I'm going to give you a chart. I love a good chart on what it means. And this model is really based on the fact that we all fall somewhere on these two spectrums. So the vertical axis, the y-axis, is assertiveness. And some of us are low on assertiveness, but some of us are high. And you can fall anywhere up and down on that assertiveness scale. Now on the X or horizontal axis, the one at the bottom is cooperativeness. And we all can fall either low or high or somewhere in the middle on how cooperative we are. And often those two spectrums determine what our preferred response style is. And I'm just going to touch on each of them. And hopefully this sounds like you, if it's your style, and gives you a little insight into yourself. So the first style I'm going to talk about is the Wiley Fox. It's the compromise style. This is the middle ground approach. The pros of this style are that it's great for complex issues where there's no simple solution. There is no, no one's going to have the whole group agree. You're not going to get consensus. And all parties are equal in power, right? There's going to have to be some compromise. Now, the cons to this is that no one's ever really satisfied. There's no one feels like they won, and you sometimes get less than optimal solutions because you were kind of forced to, everyone had to give in a little bit in order to make a decision. Are there any foxes in the room? Any foxes? Anyone have the compromise as their highest? I am not a compromise style, but was curious to see if we had any in the room. You might hear this person say something like, it isn't important enough to fight over, or I don't want to be unreasonable. If I give them this, then maybe they'll give me that. We could both live with that, right? That type of language. But if you've had 20 meetings trying to resolve differences between departments, we might have to go to the compromise style. Like, what can you live with in order to get to a decision? The next style is our competition approach. Anyone have a competition style? I'm actually a competition style. So when I take this assessment, I end up being the shark. This is a more authoritarian approach. I am impatient, and so I just want quick decisions. So the pros of this is that it's someone who's goal-oriented and that it's quick. The cons are it can breed hostility. So I have to be careful because if this is my natural style, and I'll tell you it's because I'm introverted and I'm task-oriented rather than people-oriented. I have to be careful because the cons of this is that it can breed hostility. You can lose trust or there can be hurt feelings. you could hear something like, I value the point being made, or we need to get this across the finish line, regardless of everyone's feelings about it. It's more competitive, and it tends to be, hey, I win, but there might be other people in the group that feel like they lost in that situation. So that's shark. Anyone else want to admit that they're a shark when they deal with conflict? I want to win. And I want it to go my way. Mine's more well-researched. I can give you all the excuses. But sometimes if it's something's on the line and we need this decision in the next 5 minutes, you want a shark in the room, right? You want someone who can say, hey, here's what we need to do to get from point A to point Z in the next 5 minutes. Versus compromising could take lots of time. Okay, our next one. Our owls. These are our collaboration folks. This is where problems are solved in ways that optimize the result for all parties involved. So both sides get what they want. Negative feelings are minimized. It creates trust. It maintains positive relationships. It helps you build commitment. The cons are, it takes a long, long time. This is where you've got projects that can take years to get to the finish line. It's energy consuming. It takes a lot of parties involved. And this is the I win, you win. Everyone's happy because we took the time to make sure everyone was happy with the results. Collaboration. Any owls in the room? Nice. So if you can become friends with a shark, you're a power duo, right? Because you can kind of take the best of both worlds and be able to handle anything that comes your way. But our collaborating folks are on the high cooperative spectrum. Our shark folks are more on the, hey, let's just, someone make a decision. Anyone just make a decision and let's move, right? On that side of things, less about the cooperation. Let's see, let's look at the chat window here. Kimberly says, my boss is a shark and I am an owl. Works well. I love that because it can lead to conflict with those two extremes. But if you found a way to work together, you can see things through each other's eyes and maybe come a little bit more towards the middle. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, our next one, avoidance style. This is a non-confrontational approach. This is where you're not escalating a situation. You're letting it stay. The pros are it does not escalate conflict and it postpones the difficulty. This could be where, hey, we're not going to discuss this right now, but we are going to address this in our meeting on Friday. Something like that. You know when is the right time to avoid. But the cons is that if you continually avoid and don't ever get around to it, there can be problems that remain unaddressed or problems that are unresolved, or that there's those underlying tensions that are getting close to being more and more conflict. But because your preferred style is avoiding, you might let them simmer for too long or get worse with time. Rather than address it. So, but there are times when you're in a group, when you're in a middle of a meeting, when a customer is present, you don't want to address conflict right in that moment sometimes. And that instinct to de-escalate and avoid having that blow up right now is a really strong, kind of that self-control aspect is really strong with those folks. So sharks can learn a lot from our avoidance folks and vice versa. And our last one is the accommodation group. Oh, I forgot to say the avoidance groups are our turtles. And the accommodation group are our teddy bears. Teddy bears are more focused on relationships and the people involved in a situation. They want to minimize injury, especially when there are differentials in power. power differentials, and but the relationships are maintained. The cons are the poor teddy bear is could be exploited because they're always willing to give in and do what everyone else wants in order to preserve the relationship. So sometimes the teddy bear can get a little exploited or walked on. And then sometimes the teddy bear can grow to resent all the people. Like, I constantly give in, and you can do it your way, your way, your way, but no one's noticing that. Why can't we do it my way sometimes? So there's cons there. But accommodation teddy bears are very sensitive to others' feelings and really good at maintaining relationships. So there are definitely strengths there to be had. Okay, what are your thoughts on this model and where you fell on the chart? Do you feel like it represented you? Amanda shares that Shark was her second highest. So yeah, so you can take a look at your top 2 or your top 3 and kind of what that says about you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my top one though was accommodation, which seems completely opposite of competition. So that makes 0 sense to me. I think I align more on the competition side. But
You know what it could be? How long you've been in this industry. You might have a natural style on one side of the spectrum, but then you have a learned style that you've had to grow and work on, that you've gotten better at because of maybe having to lead a team or working with a team. So I can say that like my natural style is Shark, but I've learned because I lead a training team that these are typically folks that are very people oriented, relationship oriented, that I have to kind of strengthen my accommodation style in order to make that work for my team, even though it's not my natural. So I'm not sure if that's exactly an explanation for your situation, but that could be one way of looking at it. Any other thoughts? I do see a hand up, Brad, but that might have been from earlier. Did you have something to share?
That was from earlier.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, guys, I did want to get to, we're like, time is flying by. I don't know about for you guys, but I wanted to get to the next piece, which is what's called the PUGS model of conflict resolution. And I'm going to go through the steps in PUGS, and we've only got 7 minutes. And I'm just going to highlight a few things, but these are the steps to resolving conflict. When conflict arises, someone walks in your office, they bring conflict to your attention, or you're experiencing conflict with a teammate, or you're helping mediate 2 people that are having conflict with each other. This is a great model. This is the model that I taught at Texas State. This is the part that's award-winning. So I wanted to leave you with this for sure. When you have 2 people together who are experiencing conflict, that's rule 1. You have to get the parties in the conflict together. So if someone comes to you with conflict because of that person over there is causing conflict, you have to get the parties together. And if they're like, no, I don't want to bring it up, I don't want you to do anything, you have to be able to differentiate between someone who's just venting because of a stressful day, or are they actually wanting to bring up legitimate conflict that's going on that needs to be resolved. But first step is you have to get the parties to the conflict together and have each of them, in their own words, describe the problem. And if they're not willing to do that, they're not ready to resolve conflict. If you're not ready to do that, we're going to remain with glass on the floor, right? So this is where I encourage you, if you're a leader of teams, teaching them this process so that they know when to escalate conflict to you, or even learn how to resolve conflict on their own without even having to bring you in. They can get together and say, hey, here's how I would describe what's going on. How do you describe it? So you both all parties have to describe the problem from their own point of view. And you then try and achieve understanding. Let me back up. Let me actually back up one time to describe the problem, because I did want to emphasize this, even though we're running short on time, is when they're describing the problem, they can only use I language. They can only describe the problem from their own perspective and how they see it, and not bring in the other person. For example, if someone's consistently coming in late, and you've got another teammate that's saying they're not happy with that, it's causing problems. Remember our definition of conflict? It's two people that rely on each other for something. So if this person's coming in late consistently, and it's impacting this other person, when they describe the problem, why there's this conflict, they can't say, well, they are coming in late and they are doing this and they are doing that. No, you have to describe the problem in I language only. I struggle with wanting fairness in the workplace. So when I observe something that feels unfair, I lose motivation. And then I don't feel as happy to come to work and work hard at my job, because I feel like there's some unfairness that's being unaddressed. Do you hear the difference in that? Describing the problem in I language. And if you can do this, and if you can teach your teams to do this, this is the way forward through any conflict, is being able to describe what's going on simply through your own perspective using I language. You're not escalating, you're not throwing blame, you're not throwing shade at someone else, you're not judging someone else. You don't know what's going on with that person. Maybe they lost their child care a week ago and they're struggling to get that back up and running, and maybe you don't know. So, but just describing the problem in your own perspective helps see the way to resolving it. So maybe it's even, hey, I like to plan my day the night before. I know exactly what I'm going to do first thing in the morning. I hit the ground running, and I like to be productive, and I like to get my work done. And when I show up and all of a sudden all of my good planning is thrown away because now all of a sudden I've got a bunch of stuff dumped on me unexpectedly, I feel chaos. I don't feel motivated. Do you hear all the I language? I'm just giving it to you from my perspective, and then I'm struggling. I can't work this way. Then a leader, whoops, let me go back here. Sorry, I have my papers on top of my keyboard. Yeah, the I language is probably one of the biggest steps towards resolving conflict, because you're not blaming someone else. You're simply describing, what is it that I'm experiencing that caused me to feel that this is a conflict? So if each person can do that, and you're there as a mediator, or you're involved, like, no, just describe it from your perspective. No, we're not talking about this other person, just through your eyes. What are you experiencing? Then what happens is all parties achieve understanding. And your goal is not to get someone else in trouble or to prove that you're right. Your goal should be to achieve understanding. I want to see the world through the other person's eyes. What does it look like to them? And your goal should be just having that mutual understanding of each other's perspective. And I know we're right at 2:00. I'm going to get through these last ones, but I think the describing things through the I language is one of the key points. But you achieve understanding. You identify your individual goals. What are my goals? So in this conflict, my goal would be to X, not have my day disrupted, not experience unfairness. My goal would be to be able to plan my day, walk in, and that's how it goes. Pardon me. Then we're going to generate solutions, brainstorming style, all solutions. And then we are going to see where our goals overlap to select a solution going forward. So these are the steps in the process. So your homework assignment is to look at some conflict that either you are experiencing or you have experienced in the past, and see if you could have walked through these steps in resolving conflict, and how might that have helped you through the conflict, or resolved the conflict more quickly, more efficiently. But what's even more importantly is if you do it this way, you resolve conflict while maintaining the relationship with that other person. So you can get through the conflict out the other side with a solution that works for both of you. So I always encourage people, because it stands for PUGS, PUGSS is the model, PUGS it out before escalating your conflict to your manager. If you can PUGS it and go through all of those steps amidst conflict, you'll have a stronger, more stable career and relationships throughout. So I know some of you probably have a hard stop and have to jump, but I will stay on in case any of you have questions. But that's my hour, guys. Thank you so much for your participation. Hopefully you got some aha moments and learned from our hour together. Thank you all.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Elizabeth. I did have a few aha moments, so thank you.
I hope
Thank
you
you.
did. And please share if you did. We can share that with the group.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, got something out of it. And I will be seeing you again in person during a session coming up. I don't know if I'm supposed to reveal it yet. So
You can.
I'll let Dion share if she wants to.
I'm thinking we need to drop because it seems like other people are trying to join in on this line for a
Okay.
meeting that started at 2.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
That's my
Okay.
concern.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll hop off. Thanks, everybody. Bye, y'all.
Thanks.